Grace from God our Father and from Jesus Christ our Lord be with you all. As I mentioned the last couple of Sundays, we're very grateful for the council to come up with and also discuss a theme for us as we move into the new fall, the new year, if you will, and the theme is moving forward in God's grace. And the text today, the gospel lesson today that we have just read, has a lot of grace. And particularly in verse 27, it says, after the gathering that man, the slave, or the slave who has owed the Lord 10,000 talents, and after the slave was on his knees, it says the Lord had compassion. The master had compassion, was moved with compassion. And then the master did two things. It let him go, release him. Not only that, let him go, but let go of the debt, 10,000 talents. Now, how much is 10,000 talents? Now, I've read several accounts, and one that I kind of like, it says, one talent is about 15 years of wages for a laborer. So that's, we have an accountant here, so I need to rely on their numbers, probably $500,000, right? One talent. And then multiply that by 10,000. What do you get? If any one of you have that kind of asset, please let us know. We need help, St. Barnabas. We can send our youth to Houston without any problem. So that's a beautiful description of God's grace. Somebody who has owed the master will be forgiven. Not only forgiven, will be released freely. God's grace is bountiful. But yet, there's also the second part, right? As God's grace is bountiful, we also need to live into God's grace and live with God's grace with other people. And then one practical implication of that is to live a life that forgives. Forgive others that we have been forgiven. Easier to said than done, isn't it? Forgiving is never easy. But first of all, let me just very quickly run down what I think forgiveness is not. Forgiveness is not. But first of all, to be forgiving does not mean that we let other people run over us. We don't want to be a carpet being run over. Number two, forgiving does not mean that we don't speak against evil around us, evil in individuals and evil collectively. The last 2 weeks, we talk a lot about some evil ideologies and practices in our country and around the world. Racism and white supremacist ideologies and all those isms, sexisms and what have you. Those evil ideologies that does not take into account compassion. That does not put ourselves in the place of the most vulnerable ones within our society. Those kinds of ideologies and many other things we need to speak against. And then the third thing of forgiveness is not holding people accountable. If somebody we love, even somebody we want to forgive, have done something wrong, she or he deserves some kinds of punishment and rightful punishment. And that has to be accountability, need not to be sacrificed under forgiveness. So then if forgiveness is not those things, then what is forgiveness? You know, forgiveness is really a relational concept if you come to think about it. When somebody has wronged us, when somebody had done something egregious and harmful to us, kind of like Joseph's brothers have done to him, what should we do? What should we do? It's easy for us. I have lived that many times. Easy for us to hold grudges and grievances and even the sense of hatred. It's only human, isn't it? But in spite of all that, how can we extend our forgiving hands? It's easy to say, God has forgiven all the sins that I have. Now I can freely forgive others. But it's easy said and done, isn't it? I have not found an easy way to do it. If you have, let me know. Let me know. You know, as I think about this and read the story again, I have a lot more empathy and sympathy towards that evil slave, if you will, who has been forgiven big time, but has a hard time forgiving. As I was reading the story again, something that really hit me is how angry, how forceful the way that he has treated his fellow slave. Remember that part? Just immediately after he was forgiven, he went out and saw his fellow slave who has owed him only 100 denarii. 100 denarii is about 3 months' wages. So 3 months' wages as opposed to 10,000 talents. That's a huge difference, isn't it? But then when he saw that fellow slave, what he did was he kept seizing him. Now this is the Greek grammar. He's not just seized him, but kept seizing him in continuous sense, and then also kept choking him. That's pretty violent stuff, right? And then when his fellow slave knelt down and pleaded for help, what did he do? It says he was unwilling to budge, and then he threw, literally, that's the Greek word, he threw him in the prison. Now, sometimes we know that we want to get even, right? Getting even is at least reasonable. But if you look at the example of this evil slave, if you will, this slave, he wants to do more than getting even. He wants to get on top of this poor guy who owed him only 100 denarii. He wants to have absolute control. And maybe that is really the root of the difficulty about forgiveness. Forgiveness is not just forgetting things. It's easy to said and done. Forgiveness is about letting go. It's about letting go. But when we cannot forgive, we're holding on. We're hanging on to grudges, hanging on to everything that we have against that person. We want to have total control over that person. I ran across an article that was written by a Rabbi, Wolfe from California. That article showed up in Time magazine last October. I find his description of the difficulties of forgiveness very helpful. And that may explain why that evil slave was so controlling, not relinquishing. He said, well, three reasons why it's so hard to forgive is, number one, to forgive, you have to relinquish your moral advantage. Think about that. When somebody wrongs you, immediately you have that moral superiority, right? I've been ill, I've been wronged, I'm better than that person. But to forgive means that now we are in equal plane again. We are in equal plane again. And then the second thing he said is forgiveness requires renouncing vengeance. Well, we know how difficult it is to renounce vengeance. If I have that anger in my heart, it's so difficult. It's so difficult just to say, forget and get rid of it. And then the third thing which I like is there's a pleasure in being a victim. Can we relate to that? I can relate to all of them in my many years of dealing with people. So what I want to say is forgiveness is hard. If anyone thinks that forgiveness is easy, either you have found the key to forgiveness, or maybe we have not even gotten to the depth of it. Forgiveness is difficult. Then so the question for us is, how can we learn to forgive? How can we forgive those who have wronged against us? And it happens all the time. To prepare for this sermon, I picked up a book that I browsed through many years ago. Some of you might have actually read that book or have heard that book. The book is called Left to Tell. It's written by Immaculée Ilibagiza. Anyone heard of this book? If anyone want to do a sort of a Bible study or sort of a book study on that, that's a perfect book. Immaculée Ilibagiza was a survivor of the Rwanda massacre in 1994. And some of us might remember in 1994, between April and July, only 3-4 months, anywhere from 500 to 1 million Tutsi Rwandans were killed by their Hutu sisters and brothers. 500,000 to 1 million were killed. Sadly, even among churches, churches used to be the sanctuary of genocide. But even priests and pastors involved in the killing. It is something very difficult to understand. And then Hotel Rwanda, a Oscar a famed movie, sort of told that story, so I'm not going to get into that. But Immaculée Ilibagiza was a young woman at the time. She was in college, and then at the beginning of the genocide, there are Tutsi, of course, her father, who is a renowned principal in the community, told Immaculée to escape. He said to her, go to my pastor's friend's house, and he would help you. That pastor is a Hutu. So she went to the pastor's house, and soon he found that the pastor not only was receiving her, but 6 other women. So together, the pastor put all 7 of them in a bathroom that was not often used by the family, and the size of the bathroom was 3 feet by 4 feet. They were there for 91 days. And the ages of those 7 women there is from 55 to 7 years old. So they were there for 91 days, and 91 days of hell, if you will. In those 91 days, many, many times, the Hutu killers would come to the house, or sometimes they would gather outside to listen in, to make sure that the women were not there. But many, many times, they actually came into the house and ransacked the house and threatened the pastors. And there were rumors, actually more than rumors, that there were 6, 7 women who have entered into the pastor's house but never came out. And so they came in and they tried to find them, and God did listen to the prayers. Somehow they never found him, and Immaculée told it many, many times. They were only 4 or 5 feet, or maybe even 4 and 5 inches from the killers. And somehow they never entered them. And during those 91 days, many things happened. And in the book, Let to Tell, just a marvelous book. I would highly recommend it if you want to have some readings, and very meaningful reading. In the book, she not only recounted the horrific incidents, one after the other, but she also talked about how she, as a devout Catholic, trying to reconcile her sense of hatred, her sense of grievance, and her sense of anger with the God that she knows, that we know, a God who forgives, a God who is loving, a God who is kind. And it was really moving to read that while she tried to pray, there's nothing they could do. They could not talk. They could not move. 6 or 7 of them. So the way that she did live her day and the night is to pray a lot. And she was talking about, while she was praying, sometimes it's very difficult to pray. She wants to believe, she wants to pray to God. The God that we learn from Sunday school is loving and forgiving. But then the voice is coming back from her that says, you really believe in this God? If this God is indeed so good, why? Why this massacre? Why these good neighbors, religious people, come and kill you because you are Tutsi, you are not Hutu? She had a very, very difficult time. One of the chapters, I just want to recount a chapter 11 of that book. Again, she was struggling because, just days before or day before, they were killing, people were looking for her and whatnot, her family. And then on that night, she heard commotions in a house not far from the pastor's house, and they were screaming, and there were a lot of noise, and then the screaming stopped, the noise stopped. But then the crying of a baby started. At first, the baby cried very hard, and nobody attended to her. And then by the morning, the crying weakened. And by next day, about evening time, the crying disappeared. So she was really praying, and she was really angry, and said, God, I want to pray for the forgiveness of these killers, but I cannot. I really cannot. And as she was praying into the middle of the night, somehow the voice came to her. A voice that says, you are all my children. That little baby is with me now. According to Immaculée, That voice was as clear as somebody speaking to her in the dining room, just feet away. That voice has to come from God because she could not generate that voice. And with that voice, she began to understand the situations a little bit differently. She began to see that even though the killers were out to kill, but these are still the children of God. These are not the devil. They have been tempted by the devil, but they are still God's children. And from that, a sense of peace began to descend upon her. She's not forgiving yet, but she could pray more. As she prays into the night, and another voice came to her, a voice that, speaking things that we're familiar with, the voice says, forgive them, because they know not what they do. Remember that verse from the cross? That was such a powerful release. And she said her prayers being answered. Her prayers for weeks and weeks and weeks during those horrendous times has been answered. Jesus, in his brokenness, has assured her and all of us struggling with forgiveness that we don't need to control everything. We don't need to have absolute control of everything, because in our struggling with our forgiving, Jesus is with us in his brokenness. And then he began to really be able to pray for those killers, and she has not slept that well. That night she slept very well. The best sleep she had in weeks and weeks. Sisters and brothers, forgiveness is not easy. But thank God in Christ's brokenness, in the shedding of blood, we have been given that power. Not magical power that we could turn from hatred to love, but the power of the process whereby Jesus would walk with us through that brokenness until healing has come. And Macauley's experience is enormous. I never ever experienced anything like that, but have my little experience with forgiveness. I can relate to that too. Maybe you too. It's in prayers. It's in honestly praying to God that I cannot pray. I cannot forgive. I want to pray for the person who I have perceived as wronged me. It's through the process that eventually God's voice would come to me, and then peace would come to me. Sisters and brothers, God's grace is abundant. Let us hold on that grace. Embrace that grace, even in the difficult task of trying to forgive others. Amen.